Hello, everybody. Let's give a minute to Skarbek.
Good morning, everyone. I'm running late. My apologies.
All good.
Welcome to the June 1st EMEA Kubernetes demo meeting. Let's see. On today's agenda, I wanted to discuss optimizing our zonal clusters just a wee bit. I've been working on an issue that kind of creates a little bit of efficiency changes to how we run our node pools. We've got the situation where if a single cluster were to fail for any reason, I highly suspected that our additional zonal clusters will not be able to accept all the new traffic that comes to them. So recently I redid a bunch of additional node pools, modified existing node pools such that we have larger instance sizes, and then migrated our workloads to those such that we now have the ability to extend how much load we can accept in a given zone. There's one node pool that was missed during this initial evaluation, and the target of this issue was initially the IP address space associated with those clusters, because that was kind of problematic and we were running close to saturation to the point where I think it was August, we would run out of IPs available. That way a cluster would be rendered almost useless. Let me try to find the issue that I'm working on now. But now that that is complete, I'm going to be working on discovering our saturation levels for all of our zonal clusters. This is just a continuation of this work. That way, we still have the ability to try to perform maintenance on targeted clusters in the case that we need to rebuild them. So the next thing I'm going to be starting to work on is kind of evaluating where our current saturation levels kind of sit. This is, since we don't have any metrics or anything related to this specific item, there's going to be a lot of math involved during this evaluation period. I wanted to share this issue specifically because I don't want to sit here and work in isolation. I did tag Graham and Ahmad on this, and they have provided, well, at least Graham has provided a little bit of feedback. But I just wanted everyone on this call to be aware, such that if anyone else had any opinions or questions or thoughts about this, please take 5 minutes of your day, read through this issue, and let me know if you've got any thoughts or opinions about this. I just want to make sure I'm not unintentionally not sharing the information that I'm working on, because this is not something that's very kind of like widely shared information, since this call is usually the delivery team and no one else usually shows up. So I wanted to kind of advertise it just in case anyone else in the infrastructure saw these recordings. Like I mentioned earlier, I did identify that one particular node pool got missed during the initial change. So we need to modify that node pool. I created an issue for this, but I can't quickly find that. In this case, it's the Git workloads that handle the HTTPS incoming traffic. That node pool was not touched, and we're still running quite inefficiently with that particular node pool. I think that's the last node pool that needs to be modified. And then we should be in an okay position, barring what I find during my research. Ruben, why don't you go ahead and verbalize?
So I don't know if we've ever done something like this before, but could we one day want to manually bring down a cluster or sort of disconnect a cluster and test what actually happens?
Yes. So the epic that this issue falls under is geared towards doing just that. So the ultimate goal here is to, this started because of IP space saturation, and we knew we were going to run out of IP addresses. But, you know, one of the secondary goals was to make sure that during a disaster scenario that we have a failed cluster, we still have the ability for extra capacity for the other two zones to make up for the fact that we've got a failed cluster. So currently, one of the goals of the overlying epic is to test bringing down a cluster and staging and rebuilding it. And there's multiple reasons for doing that. Disaster recovery, I already mentioned, but the other one is just to validate that we can rebuild a cluster successfully. We've got documentation kind of spread out in various places, but we don't have a procedure that goes from step 0 to completion on building a cluster and putting workloads on it. So kind of one of our first steps is to evaluate the saturation levels, which is currently assigned to me. Time is just not on my side. But the next step will be to bring down a cluster in staging and test the capacity of being able to build a cluster without impacting team delivery or operations as a whole. And then after that, we'll be doing the same in production because we already know that we need the ability to rebuild clusters as is. There are certain configuration changes which we are not allowed to change with clusters, such as our IP address space configurations and our network policy configuration. And there's a few other things. But like having the ability to take down a cluster for maintenance is going to become more important as time passes. So that is currently our goal at the moment.
Would we try building a cluster before bringing down one?
Currently, I think it's easier if we destroy the old cluster. And the reason why I say this is because our current tooling relies on the naming of our clusters very heavily. All of our repositories, all of our tooling assumes you've got a named cluster and we're going to call the cluster by the name, and our tooling is going to be like, give me the information for this cluster. Here's the name of that cluster. So because of that, I want to target being able to just wipe away a cluster and rebuild it with the same name. That will introduce the least amount of change across the entire situation that this would create. That way I have to modify the least amount in our tooling that's kind of everywhere. I think in the future, so long as we could prove that we could at least build a cluster with minimal interruption, being able to create new clusters as replacements and turn down old ones would be a good future goal to have. But that's not currently my target at the moment.
Skarbek, when you say by the name, you mean the name of the instance on Google Cloud, the whatever, or the host name?
The name of the cluster. So we name all of our clusters in very specific ways that is managed by our Terraform module. And that can't be changed. Otherwise, the cluster gets completely destroyed.
Did we test it that we can claim back the same name in a very short amount of time since deletion?
No.
I think this is something worth checking. I suspect that this can be done, but yeah, before deleting something for test, I would rather just create something else, delete and claim it back, just to make sure that this is something we can do.
Yeah, because I know specifically for like object storage, those names, they get stuck around for a certain period of time. Like you can't reuse that name. I think databases are the same. So I think testing Kubernetes infrastructure falls under the same concern.
Why I was asking.
Okay. Yeah. So I'll find the issue and I'll make sure that's an item that we test first, because I could test that outside of all of this that I'm talking about, luckily. Cool. Does anyone else have any questions about our zonal clusters and my goals here before we move on? Excellent. Ahmad, let's talk about GitLab SSHD a little bit.
Sure. We intended to execute change request today to roll out, to increase the traffic on Canary 50%-ish. But me and Scarback figured out that Canary cannot handle the traffic actually due to different node pool type and the count of the nodes or instances we have. So until this is fixed, because this will also affect rolling out to production, this will be fixed tomorrow, I hope. I will like prepare the MRs and I will like put Scarback to review them. But this to be changed tomorrow, and I changed the due date to increase the traffic to also tomorrow. Hopefully you can do both tomorrow, but yeah, finger crossed. And for the IP allowed, like the proxy rollout test, we also like executed this, I think yesterday with Hendrik in a call. So this part is done. I drafted talk like from Hendrik's change request to enable the proxy protocols, GitLab SHD change request, and I will also like send it to Scarback to review today. So hopefully this also like will be done this week. This to enable proxy protocol of the GitLab SHD. This is different part of the story, basically.
So Akmal, the one thing I would recommend doing, if you can before you end your day, I saw that you updated the issue about why we decided not to do the rollout today.
Yeah.
Let's grab some details on how badly we were impacted by that and maybe link to some of the configurations that you and I were looking at. That way people outside of just you and I understand how bad the impact actually is.
Okay.
That way others have an understanding of what we are battling and how we reached that conclusion, so they understand the situation and the reason for pausing that work. I think that would just be useful for everyone who tries to come by and looks at it outside of this meeting.
Sure.
And I think that's another thing I have to add. Does anyone else have any questions about this? Cool. Excellent. Vlad, let's talk about Camo proxy.
Yeah. Hi, team. So we managed to deploy to staging. That went well. There were some minor complications, but the good part is that we have the steps that would apply to prod as well. And we managed to go around or to eliminate that wrinkle that we observed. And I think Henry made a note in the document about it. So we had to invalidate the markdown cache because when we did a switch over to user content 1, the old images were still pointing to the previous backend. So that's why we had to do that. And I guess we wanted to bring it to the attention of the entire team to kind of understand thoroughly what the implications are, because Henry mentioned this. There is some kind of, a pretty big load on the DB because the caching is done in the DB. Henry, would you like to add anything, or should we go through the steps to actually explain?
I think the steps are super detailed to go through in detail, but I think the important part is that we found a way to do the switchover without any interruption. But the strategy that we need to follow is that we need to switch over to a temporary other DNS name during the switchover to have a working certificate, and later switch back to the original DNS name for the Camo proxy URLs that we use. And the way how GitLab is working for Markdown is that when Markdown is generated or when a view is created the first time, then this will be cached in the database. So we have a huge Markdown cache inside of the database. And the next time you display the same page, the Markdown will not be generated, but it will just take from the database. And the problem here is when we change the asset proxy URL setting to the temporary secondary DNS entry that we will create during the switchover, then for newly created external images, it will work. It will create the new markdown and it will point to the new temporary URL. But all old existing images will stay the same because they will just take from cache from the database. So what we will need to do is when we do the switchover to invalidate the markdown cache. And thankfully, therefore, is an API call which is just doing that. It increases the markdown version number in the database, and then when checking when the next request is happening for some markdown, then GitLab will see, okay, this is an older version than we have in the database. We have an older version than we have right now, so we need to regenerate this and then save this new thing in the database. So this way, we will get the new markdown be generated with the new DNS entry. But that means that once we invalidate, that for a few hours or days, we will have a lot of database writes because all markdown will be updated when first viewed again. And we had those cases a few times, I think, where we wondered if we can do this, if we should do this. We also had some mitigations around issues with Canary and gprod having different versions, for instance, and they're having a switch forward and backward between markdown and validation for a while. This is all fixed, but in general, it's so that we need to take care of how much load we generate here. And that means we should probably execute this on a weekend where we have less load so that when we have low traffic over time, regenerate most of the stuff and don't hit it during high business times. So this is the one complication here. I think it should work fine. When we last time did it, as far as I could see in issues, we didn't really have a very high impact on the primary. We could see a slight increase of writes, but nothing that was really dramatic. So we should easily be able to survive this, but still it's hard to estimate, hard to test. And so we should be careful and do it on a weekend probably. Yeah, I think it's important to think about that. And that's why we wanted to mention it here. So if you have any ideas around this. Besides that, I think the steps are more or less sound. I will prepare a change request issue for gprod with the detailed steps for the switchover, and then we should be able to do this when we feel ready for it.
And just to be clear, it will only update each request of camel proxy. So it's not going to be a surge of everything. It's going to be gradual at the pace of camel proxy requests, which is about 30 requests a second a peak, usually 15-ish.
Oh, no, it will be more because we also have markdown, which is not pointing to camel proxy, right? Yeah, so every markdown really needs to be recalculated, but only when it's first time visited. So it will be over time, over several hours and days. You will see the effect, but it shouldn't be too much, I think. Yeah.
And I saw that we had a security issue spun up for this work. I marked it as a blocker for moving forward. Was that the right thing to do, or is this something that's already being taken care of elsewhere?
Yeah, we talked about this today. This needs to be fixed first. So we need to come up probably with security policies, right, Vlad?
Yep. Okay. I mean, I haven't looked into it too much, but I think security policy should fit into this. Basically, we just need to make sure that the pods are not using internal IPs to be, for anyone to do any nefarious things with them.
Okay. So at least that's on
it. It is blocking it. Yep, and it also needs to be fixed for staging.
Gotcha. Okay. Alrighty. Any other questions regarding camel proxy? Okay. Michele, I did want to thank you for taking notes. I saw that you were typing earlier, so I greatly appreciate that. The last thing I had was kind of an open question. And the reason for this was just because I had a long weekend. So I was just thinking about all of the various things that we've got, whether scheduled or unscheduled. And I'm kind of just curious as to if anyone had any specific things that kind of bug them when it comes to working with, monitoring, or watching Kubernetes or deployments or the configurations and stuff. I know we've got a lot of open issues, but I'm curious if there's anything specific anyone in here had that was at the top of their mind. I'm not looking to adjust priorities. I'm just kind of curious as to what others might be thinking about when it's like, hey, I run into this all the time and it's irritating me. Why do we still deal with this kind of situation? Because I've got, 100 things at the top of my mind. So it's kind of hard to, figure out what's the most important item. But I'm just curious if anyone else had anything they wanted to bring up. I hear silence, but I do see some people thinking. So either they're thinking about how great everything is, or there's just like nothing to work on. That's wonderful.
They're just thinking which one to pick,
No.
I think one of the biggest pain points that will also be increasingly one is how we need to deal with mixing deployments with config changes, right? This is really painful in Kubernetes right now. And it can easily cause a lot of trouble. It slows you down, and it's a lot of manual work to make sure that you run things at the same and at the right time. And if we could solve that one, I think that would help a lot with the work that we need to do daily, and B, also help us with avoiding certain incidents and stuff.
So on that note, let's see. I don't know if you are a part of this issue. I don't see you as receiving notification on this. So I'm going to link it here because Graham is working on trying to figure that out. So this is just one of many issues that fall under a target epic, which is trying to figure out what to do with our CI pipelines. Since you're about to leave us, Henry, I encourage you to take a quick gander at this if able, and see if you can't drop any opinions or ideas that you might have.
I will, but probably not this week. But I see this is not a confident issue, so I can still look at it later when I'm, outside of GitLab. So maybe I will have some comments then.
Excellent.
Transparency, yay.
Hey, open source, all inclusive.
My goal is to get bored, and when I'm bored, I maybe will look for something to do, right? So I will just come in with some bad comments and annoy you with that.
Oh, Michele, I think we need to find a policy for this.
Start to mark everything as confidential.
Oh no, quite the opposite. Just send everything over to Henry to work on when he's bored.
Makes sense. It would actually be funny, to see from outside Henry commenting, hey guys, I think it should be done different way.
I think we sometimes have the case that some well-known former GitLab team members are putting up comments, productive comments even.
Nice.
That's funny.
Cool. Well, if no one has anything else, I think we're good to end the meeting.
If that's the end, then I just want to say, because I think some of you I will see the last time here in this video meeting, I just want to say thank you and goodbye. And I really appreciated to work with you. Tomorrow I will shut off Slack, probably because I need to take care of organizing my offboarding and stuff. And Friday I will not have any access anymore. So it was really great to work with you, and hope to see you again.
Same here, Henry. We'll miss you.
Yeah, it was nice working with you.
Good luck, Henry.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely day.